All you can afford is just a small cabin, so what will our coming to your housewarming offer us? Those words. They're still burning in my chest like acid, eating through everything I thought I knew about love, about family, about being a mother. My own daughter said that to me. My own flesh and blood. Standing there in her designer clothes, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen like my invitation was some kind of joke, some pathetic plea from a woman who didn't know her place anymore. She was laughing when she said it. Actually laughing. The sound came out of her mouth like broken glass, sharp and cutting, designed to slice through whatever dignity I had left. And then, as if that wasn't enough, as if she needed to drive the knife deeper into the wound she'd just opened, she added with that casual cruelty that only comes from years of practice, "We have a night out with our men, so don't expect anybody." I smiled through the silence that followed. I actually smiled. Can you believe that? After being gutted by my own child, I smiled and whispered, "That's fine, my dear." Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We smile when our hearts are breaking. We say it's fine when nothing is fine. We swallow our pain and pretend it tastes like acceptance. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the small cabin she was mocking, the place she dismissed like it was some pathetic consolation prize for a life half-lived, was actually a $6 million ocean villa. The same house she once called her dream home when she thought it belonged to someone else, someone worthy of her attention. The one now gleaming across television screens around the world, featured on HGTV like some impossible fantasy made real. When that episode aired, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The same phone that usually sat silent for days, weeks sometimes, suddenly alive with voices that had forgotten I existed. And for once, for the first time in years, it wasn't me calling to be heard, desperate for scraps of attention from children who treated my love like an inconvenience. No, this time it was them, begging to be seen, scrambling to explain, to apologize, to somehow crawl back into a story they'd written themselves out of. Before I tell you how everything changed after that night, before I show you what happens when silence becomes the loudest revenge of all, I need you to understand something. I need you to see how we got here, to this moment where a mother's love became a weapon she never wanted to wield. You want to know about entitlement? Let me paint you a picture of what it looks like when it wears your children's faces, when it sits at your dinner table and calls you mom while treating you like a servant who should be grateful for the privilege. For years, God, so many years I've lost count, I raised them alone. Proud, yes, but constantly dismissed, constantly reminded that my best wasn't quite good enough, that my love came with limitations they weren't willing to accept. There was this hierarchy in our family, this unspoken understanding that I existed at the bottom of it, useful for emergencies and guilt, but not much else. One daughter, my eldest, the one who learned cruelty first and practiced it best, she'd visit only when her bank account ran dry, when her husband's business hit rough patches, when she needed someone to play the role of the understanding mother who'd write checks without asking questions. She'd sit in my living room with this expression of barely contained disgust, like the air itself offended her, like being in my presence was some kind of sacrifice she was making for the greater good. The other one, she'd brag about her husband's success at every opportunity, turning every conversation into a performance designed to remind me how far above my world she'd risen. David just bought me another car, she'd say, or we're renovating the kitchen again. You should see the marble we picked out. Always the emphasis on we, always the subtle reminder that she belonged to something bigger, better, more important than whatever I could offer. Every time I invited them over, Christmas, birthdays, just because I missed their voices, they'd exchange those looks. You know the ones. The looks that say more than words ever could. I'd catch them whispering in corners, "Her house smells like mothballs," or "Mom's living her poor old widow fantasy again." They thought I couldn't hear, but mothers hear everything. We developed this supernatural ability to catch the words that aren't meant for us, the truths that cut deeper than any intended insult. I never argued with them. Never raised my voice, never demanded the respect I'd earned by bleeding for them, by sacrificing pieces of myself I'll never get back. I simply kept building. Not the house, that came later. I kept building patience, understanding, hope that maybe if I just loved them hard enough, long enough, they'd remember what that felt like and want to return it. I wasn't competing with them. How could I? They had everything I'd never been able to give myself. Youth, money, husbands who came home at night, futures that stretched out bright and endless. I was just creating peace in a world they'd outgrown, trying to carve out some small space where love didn't come with conditions, where being family meant something more than obligation and emergency contact information. But peace, I was learning, is expensive. And love, real love, costs more than most people are willing to pay. The villa started as a dream, the kind of impossible fantasy that keeps you awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering what your life might look like if you were brave enough to want something just for yourself. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, my proof that I was more than the sum of their dismissals, more than the woman who'd raised them and then gracefully stepped aside when they no longer needed her services. I spent years saving for it. Years of eating simple meals, driving the same car until it practically fell apart, buying generic everything while my daughters shopped for designer handbags they'd show off on social media like trophies. Every dollar I didn't spend on myself went into an account I called my someday fund, because someday I was going to build something that couldn't be taken away, something that couldn't be dismissed or mocked or forgotten. The restoration work nearly killed me. I'm not young anymore, and my body reminded me of that fact every morning when I'd wake up with aches in places I didn't know could hurt. But I did most of it myself, painted every wall, polished every beam, chose every tile like I was composing a symphony. Each room became a prayer, a meditation on what home could feel like when it belonged completely to you. Every wall I painted was a prayer for respect. Every beam I polished was a memory of being overlooked, transformed into something beautiful, something lasting. I wasn't just building a house. I was building proof that I existed, that I mattered, that the woman they'd relegated to birthday cards and emergency phone calls was capable of creating something extraordinary. I chose the location carefully, right by the ocean, where the sound of waves could drown out the silence that had become my constant companion. For years, I'd lived with the kind of quiet that screams, the absence of voices that once filled my days. But ocean silence is different. It's purposeful, peaceful, alive with possibilities instead of heavy with loss. When HGTV called it a masterpiece of serenity, when they featured it in that episode that would change everything, I didn't smile. I just thought, maybe peace finally has a price. Maybe all those years of being told I wasn't enough, didn't have enough, couldn't offer enough, maybe they were just preparation for this moment when I could offer everything and choose exactly who deserved to receive it. The villa became my love letter to myself, the home I'd never had but always needed. Every sunset view, every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every candle I lit in rooms that finally felt like mine, it all became proof that I didn't need their approval to create something beautiful. I just needed to stop waiting for it. The invitation went out on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd spent Monday night going over the guest list, crossing out names and adding others, trying to create the perfect balance of people who would appreciate what I was offering instead of calculating what it could do for them. I kept it simple. You're invited to a housewarming celebration at my new home. Saturday, 7 o'clock. Hope to see you there. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed for attention or demanded explanations. Just an invitation from a mother to her children, the kind of thing that should have been met with curiosity at worst, excitement at best. Their reply came back the next day, delivered via text message because apparently even rejection doesn't warrant a phone call anymore. The words appeared on my screen like a slap, cold and dismissive, and so casually cruel it took my breath away. We have plans. Enjoy your little cabin, Mom. Little cabin. As if I were playing house, as if I were some confused old woman who didn't understand the difference between dreaming and reality. The dismissal was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. My response came automatically, trained by years of swallowing disappointment. That's fine. 2 words. That's all I could manage without my voice breaking, without the pain bleeding through the phone and giving them the satisfaction of knowing they'd hit their target perfectly. But it wasn't fine. Nothing about it was fine. It was finished. That was the moment, sitting there staring at those 2 words on my phone screen, when something inside me finally broke. Not my heart, that had been breaking for years. Something deeper, something that had been holding me together through all the dismissals and disappointments and casual cruelties that had become our family's language. I was done begging for belonging. Done pretending that love was supposed to hurt this much, that being a mother meant accepting whatever scraps of attention they chose to throw my way. I was done waiting for them to remember that I was worth more than emergency contact information and guilt-motivated holiday visits. The decision formed slowly, like ice crystallizing in water, beautiful and sharp and absolutely final. If they didn't want to see what I'd built, what I'd become, then I'd find people who did. If they couldn't recognize the value in what I was offering, then I'd offer it to those who would treasure it. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I was going to choose. That night, I pulled out my old notebook, the same one I'd used for years to write down their birthdays, their anniversaries, their children's names, all the details of lives I was peripheral to but desperate to remain part of. The pages were worn soft from years of use, filled with grocery lists and phone numbers, and all the small notes that make up a life spent caring for others. I drew a line down the center of a fresh page, dividing it into 2 columns with surgical precision. At the top of the left column, I wrote, "Those who always had a seat." At the top of the right, "Those who never did." The left column filled quickly. My daughters, obviously. My son-in-law who treated me like an embarrassing relic. The grandchildren who barely knew my name. Friends who'd moved on to more exciting lives, who returned my calls days later with excuses about being busy, being overwhelmed, being anything but available. But the right column, that's where the magic happened. That's where I rediscovered all the people I'd forgotten about while chasing after those who'd forgotten about me. The neighbor whose husband left her after 30 years of marriage, who sat on her porch every evening looking like she was waiting for someone to remember she existed. I'd waved to her for months, made small talk about the weather, but never thought to invite her into my world because I was too busy trying to stay in theirs. My cousin Sarah, who everyone said talked too much at family gatherings, who got excluded from invitations because her enthusiasm made people uncomfortable. She'd call me sometimes, just to chat, and I'd always cut the conversations short because I was waiting for more important calls that never came. My sister-in-law Margaret, who'd been widowed 3 years ago and had slowly disappeared from family events because no one knew how to talk to her anymore, how to include a single woman in a world designed for couples. She loved my late husband like a brother, had been part of our family for decades, but grief had made her invisible. The woman from my book club who always brought homemade cookies and never got credit. The cashier at the grocery store who asked about my day like she actually cared about the answer. The librarian who saved books she thought I'd enjoy, who treated literature like love letters to be shared. I underlined each name carefully, deliberately, like I was signing a contract with myself. These were the people who'd been waiting for invitations that never came, who'd been overlooked by everyone who mattered, who understood what it felt like to be peripheral to other people's happiness. This time, I said aloud to my empty house, my voice echoing off walls that had heard too many one-sided conversations, I wasn't waiting to be invited. I was setting the table myself. And for the first time in years, the silence that followed didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like possibility. The preparation became a kind of meditation, a ritual of transformation that went far beyond choosing flowers and planning menus. Every decision I made was deliberate, purposeful, designed to create the exact opposite of every family gathering I'd ever hosted, where I'd bent myself into impossible shapes trying to please people who couldn't be pleased. I walked through the villa like I was seeing it for the first time, candles glowing in every room, ocean breeze moving the curtains like the house itself was breathing, alive with anticipation. The late afternoon light painted everything gold, transforming familiar spaces into something magical, something worthy of celebration. When the chef I'd hired asked what kind of dinner this was supposed to be, I paused for a long moment, looking out at the ocean view that had cost me everything and given me everything back. "It's for people who stopped being invited," I told him, and something in my voice must have conveyed the weight of that statement, because he just nodded and started planning a menu that would honor that purpose. Every detail was chosen to reflect equality. No head of the table where someone could claim dominance, identical plates that said every guest mattered equally, chairs that were all the same height, same comfort, same dignity. Even the lighting was carefully planned so no one would sit in shadows while others basked in spotlights. I'd learned something about fairness over the years of being treated unfairly. It isn't decorative. It's structural. It's built into the foundation of how you treat people, woven into every interaction, every gesture, every choice you make about who deserves your attention and who doesn't. The flowers I chose were simple but abundant, not the expensive arrangements my daughters favored, the ones designed to impress rather than welcome, but honest blooms that said, "You belong here," instead of, "Look what I can afford." I wanted beauty that invited participation rather than admiration, warmth that drew people in instead of keeping them at a respectful distance. As the sun began to set, painting the ocean in shades of pink and gold that no camera could capture, I lit candles one by one throughout the house. Each flame felt like a small rebellion, a declaration that this space would be filled with light for people who'd spent too long in other people's shadows. I set the table for 8, the perfect number for conversation that flows naturally, for connections that form organically, for the kind of evening where everyone's voice matters and no one has to fight to be heard. The empty chairs looked expectant, hopeful, ready to embrace whoever needed embracing. When everything was ready, when the house glowed with the kind of warmth I'd always imagined but never quite achieved, I stood in my kitchen and looked at my phone sitting silent on the counter. For once, the only sound I wanted to hear was joy that didn't depend on permission, laughter that wasn't earned through careful navigation of other people's moods and expectations. I was ready to host the kind of evening I'd always dreamed of but never dared to create, one where love was abundant instead of rationed, where belonging was assumed instead of negotiated, where being family meant something more than shared DNA and accumulated resentments. They arrived like rain after a drought, tentative at first, then flowing, then abundant. Margaret came first, clutching a bottle of wine and looking around with the kind of wonder I remembered from my own first glimpse of true beauty. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw the ocean view, when she realized this wasn't charity or pity, but genuine invitation, genuine celebration. "Beverly," she whispered, "this is magnificent." "How did you?" But I just hugged her and said, "How doesn't matter. What matters is you're here." Sarah arrived next, bringing her famous apple pie and that irrepressible energy that had made other people uncomfortable but made me smile. She talked the entire time she was taking off her coat, chattering about the drive and the sunset and how she'd gotten lost twice, but didn't mind because the anticipation made everything better. My neighbor came with wildflowers from her garden, apologizing for their simplicity until I told her they were perfect, that I'd rather have honest beauty than expensive arrangements any day. The book club friend arrived with a first edition of poetry because she said the evening felt like something that deserved to be commemorated with words that last. One by one, they filled the spaces I'd prepared, and the house came alive in a way it never had before. These weren't people performing for each other, weren't people calculating the social value of every interaction. These were people grateful to be included, delighted to discover they weren't alone, hungry for the kind of connection that happens when guards come down and hearts open up. The conversation flowed like wine, moving from topic to topic without the careful navigation required when every subject might trigger someone's ego or insecurity. They talked about books and gardens, about dreams deferred and hopes renewed, about the difference between loneliness and solitude, between being alone and being lonely. As the evening deepened and the candles burned lower, I found myself watching them with something close to wonder. This was what I'd been missing all those years while I chased after my daughter's approval, while I begged for scraps of attention from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth their time. This was what family could feel like when it was chosen instead of inherited, built instead of assumed. Margaret caught my eye across the table and raised her wine glass in a silent toast. The others followed, and for a moment we sat in perfect communion, bound not by blood or obligation, but by the simple recognition that we all deserve to be celebrated, to be seen, to be valued for who we were rather than what we could provide. To second chances, Margaret said softly. To found family, added Sarah. To the courage to start over, whispered my neighbor. I raised my glass and felt something heal inside my chest, some wound I'd carried so long I'd forgotten what wholeness felt like. To love that doesn't cost everything, I said, and meant it with every broken piece of my heart that was finally learning how to mend. The HGTV episode aired on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after that perfect dinner party, 3 weeks after I'd remembered what it felt like to be surrounded by people who chose to be there. I'd almost forgotten about the cameras, about the interview I'd given months earlier when the producer called my villa a masterpiece of serenity and asked if they could feature it in their Coastal Home series. I was making tea when my phone started buzzing. Not the occasional text or missed call I'd grown accustomed to, but a constant stream of notifications that made the device vibrate against the kitchen counter like an angry insect. The first message was from a number I didn't recognize. Isn't that your mom's house on HGTV right now? Then another. That place is incredible. Your mother has amazing taste. And another. Just saw the Ocean Villa episode. That's your family's house, right? I turned on the television just in time to see drone footage of my home, the villa I'd built with my own hands and my own dreams, glowing on the screen like something from a fairy tale. The narrator's voice filled my living room, professional and admiring. When Beverly Hart designed her ocean villa, she built more than a home. She built a sanctuary where beauty serves purpose and every detail tells a story of resilience and grace. The camera moved through rooms I'd painted, over furniture I'd chosen, across views I'd earned through years of sacrifice and saving. It was my story being told, my vision being celebrated, my worth being broadcast to millions of people who didn't know me but could recognize beauty when they saw it. My phone was vibrating constantly now, messages flooding in from people I hadn't heard from in years, from distant relatives and old acquaintances and complete strangers who'd somehow tracked down my contact information. But mixed in with the genuine admiration and surprise were the calls I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Missed call from Elizabeth, my eldest daughter. Missed call from Jennifer, my youngest. 3 missed calls from Elizabeth. 7 missed calls from Jennifer. 12 missed calls from Elizabeth. The voicemails started next, and I could hear the panic creeping into their voices as the evening wore on and the episode repeated, as more people saw what they'd dismissed, recognized what they'd overlooked. Mom, call me back. I can't believe you didn't tell us about this. People are asking me questions I can't answer. Beverly, this is embarrassing. How could you let us look stupid like this? Call me immediately. Mom, my phone won't stop ringing. Everyone wants to know about your house. Why didn't you say anything? I listened to each message twice, studying the progression from confusion to anger to something that might have been desperate regret. For the first time in years, they needed something from me that money couldn't buy and influence couldn't provide. They needed to understand how they'd miscalculated so completely, how they'd dismissed something so spectacular. How they'd managed to exile themselves from a story that was being celebrated by strangers. I didn't call them back. Not that night, not the next day. I let them sit with their shock and their embarrassment and their sudden, desperate need to be included in something they'd rejected when it was freely offered. The silence on my end wasn't punishment. It was peace. For once, I wasn't scrambling to explain myself, to justify my choices, to make them feel better about their own decisions. I was simply existing in the calm center of my own life, watching the storm of their regret swirl around me without being pulled into it. Let them wonder. Let them calculate what they'd lost by thinking they knew what I was worth. Elizabeth finally got through on Saturday morning, calling at 7 a.m. like an emergency, like the house was on fire instead of just her pride. Mom. Her voice was sharp, controlled, the tone she used when she was trying not to explode, but couldn't quite manage calm. We need to talk. Good morning, Elizabeth, I said, settling into my favorite chair with my coffee, looking out at the ocean that had become my daily meditation. How are you? How am I? How am I? The control slipped. I'm mortified, Mom. Do you understand what you've done? My friends, my neighbors, everyone I know has been calling and texting since Thursday night. They all want to know why I didn't know about your house, why you didn't invite us to this amazing housewarming party they keep hearing about. I did invite you, I said quietly. You declined. You said it was a cabin. You made it sound like some tiny little place we wouldn't want to visit. I never said it was a cabin, Elizabeth. You said that. I simply invited you to my housewarming celebration. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of assumptions and dismissals that were finally being examined in the harsh light of consequence. You deliberately misled us, she said finally, but her voice was less certain now, less righteous. I invited my daughters to see my new home, I repeated. You told me you had better plans. You told me all I could afford was a small cabin and asked what coming to my housewarming could possibly offer you. I didn't mean. You meant exactly what you said. And I heard exactly what you meant. Another silence. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her scrambling for some way to rewrite this story so she wasn't the villain, so she was somehow the victim of my deception rather than the author of her own exclusion. You made us look stupid, she said finally, and there it was, not remorse for hurting me, not recognition of what she'd thrown away, but anger that her reputation had been damaged by her own choices. I made you look like daughters who don't know their mother very well, I said. That's not my fault. So what now? You're going to punish us forever because we couldn't come to one party. The question hung in the air like smoke, revealing everything about how she saw the situation, how she understood love and family and the weight of casual cruelty. This isn't punishment, Elizabeth. This is consequence. You decided I wasn't worth your time, that my home wasn't worth your visit, that my invitation wasn't worth your consideration. You are wrong about all of those things, but that's not my problem to solve. You're our mother. Yes, I am. And I raised you to make your own choices. I just stopped pretending that your choices don't matter, that they don't have results, that love means I have to absorb whatever you decide to dish out without ever responding. I could hear her crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of a child discovering that actions have consequences, that words have power, that relationships require more than DNA to survive. When you learn that love doesn't come with a price tag, I said gently, when you understand that family means showing up not just when it benefits you, but when it matters to someone else, I'll send you the right address next time. And then I hung up. Not with anger, but with the kind of finality that comes from finally understanding your own worth. The morning after that conversation, I woke up before dawn and walked barefoot through the villa, letting my feet remember every inch of floor I'd installed, every room I'd painted, every corner I'd transformed from vision into reality. The ocean was calm, painted silver by moonlight that was slowly giving way to the first hints of sunrise. In the dining room, the table still held traces of that perfect evening 3 weeks ago. Candles melted down to stubs, Chairs slightly shifted from where people had leaned in to hear stories better. A wine stain on the tablecloth that I decided to keep because it marked the spot where Margaret had laughed so hard she'd knocked over her glass. I ran my hand along the wood, feeling the grain beneath my palm, remembering every hour I'd spent sanding and staining and polishing this piece until it gleamed. For years, I'd waited for their chairs to open, for some invitation into their lives that would prove I still mattered. But now I'd built the whole table myself, created the whole gathering, chosen every person who belonged in this story. The sunrise painted the ocean in shades of gold and pink, and I stood at the window watching the light change and shift, remembering all the sunrises I'd seen from kitchen windows in houses that never quite felt like home. In spaces where I was tolerated rather than celebrated, where my presence was endured rather than treasured. My phone sat silent on the counter, not the desperate, demanding silence of being ignored, but the peaceful quiet of choice, of boundaries maintained, of a life finally lived on my own terms. They would call again, my daughters. They would want to explain, to justify, to somehow negotiate their way back into a story they'd rejected when it was offered freely. But the terms had changed now. The power had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger takes too much energy, burns too hot, demands too much attention. What I felt instead was something cleaner, something that sat in my chest like sunlight, the satisfaction of finally understanding my own value, of finally creating the life I'd always deserved but never dared to claim. If you've ever been dismissed by your own children, if you've ever had your love treated like a burden instead of a gift, if you've ever smiled through the silence while your heart was breaking and whispered, "That's fine," when nothing was fine, I want you to understand something. Silence isn't weakness. It's structure. It's the foundation you build when you finally stop trying to hold up buildings that were designed to exclude you. It's the space you create when you stop filling every awkward moment with apologies for existing, explanations for mattering, justifications for taking up room in a world that has always had space for you if you'd just been brave enough to claim it. Sometimes walking away isn't losing. It's rebuilding on your own terms, with your own vision, for people who understand that love is something you share, not something you ration. It's choosing abundance over scarcity, celebration over tolerance, joy over the kind of peace that costs everything. I built this villa with my own hands, but more than that, I built a life where every sunrise belongs to me, where every sunset is mine to enjoy, where the only voices that matter are the ones that choose to be here, that appreciate what's being offered, that understand the difference between a house and a home, between family and DNA, between love and obligation. The ocean waves keep rolling in, constant and eternal and utterly indifferent to human drama, to family feuds, to the small heartbreaks that feel enormous when you're living inside them. They remind me that some things endure not because they fight, but because they simply keep being what they are, beautiful and powerful and completely themselves. That's what I am now, completely myself, finally. A woman who knows what her love is worth, who has stopped giving it away to people who don't value it, who has learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between silence and peace, between the end of one story and the beginning of another. And if you're listening to this from your own small corner of dismissal, from your own moment of being overlooked or undervalued or told that what you have to offer isn't enough, know this: you are not required to accept less than you deserve. You are not obligated to keep showing up for people who treat your presence like a burden. You are allowed to build your own table, invite your own guests, create your own family from the people who see your worth and celebrate it instead of calculating it. The sun is fully up now, painting my villa in shades of gold that no camera could capture, warming rooms that have finally learned what home feels like. My coffee is getting cold, but I don't mind. There's nowhere else I need to be, no one else I need to convince of my value, no other approval I need to seek. I am exactly where I belong, surrounded by beauty I created and peace I earned and love I chose instead of inherited. And that, finally, is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.